10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hello world, welcome to the Women of BSV interview channel. We are honored today to have with us Bryan Daugherty. He is the Regional Director of North America and Technical Outreach, the manager for Bitcoin Association. He has done a wealth of research of late in both cybersecurity as well as the impact on the environment of enterprise technologies. So we are delighted to learn with you today, Bryan. Welcome to the interview.
Thank you for having me. I've been a fan of your guys' show for quite some time, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you both, or all of you today.
Can you tell us a bit about yourself then, Bryan? The roles that you have and how you got into the space?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I actually came into this space right around 2016 after, a long career of technology sales and integration. And that was everything from small business to mid-market to, enterprise grade technology, digital transformations. And as I, was sitting across these C-level execs' desks, and as I learned more about blockchain and just trying to provide the best consultation advice for technology advancement and, creating efficiencies within the enterprise. Sorry about that. Creating efficiencies within the enterprise, I couldn't help but, as I learned more about BSV and blockchain in general, to sort of see the synergies of how this technology could be implemented at the enterprise level to create these efficiencies, especially as I was learning about micropayments and scalability and, the replacement of legacy hardware and software, which actually became a problem for many of my clients, because as you can imagine, when you take something, say, just as simple as cybersecurity, you have everything from endpoint security to asset management to recovery. So a lot of the technologies that are currently available, unless you're buying this, say, the all Nike sweatsuit, right, from one provider, they don't really speak or communicate very well together. And, one of the biggest complaints that I always had was that CISO would want to be able to have what's called a one pane of glass viewership into their network. And all that means is that they take all these different devices, softwares that are integrated onto their network and give them, the bells and whistles to understand what's happening in real time so that they can make specific decisions. And, the problem with today's legacy hardware and software is many times it doesn't, like I said, communicate or work very well together. And unless you're buying it from one suite of, offering from one company, you really don't have that viewership into your network. And to be able to do that is almost impossible at this point because of all the different functionalities and capabilities that are needed. So, as I came along in my career of technology sales, I was always a big fan of emerging technologies. And as I came across blockchain in 2016 and, especially Dr. Craig Wright and his understanding of scalability and using this in the enterprise setting, it really resonated with me, with especially the things that I was doing at the time. And it just brought more passion and more drive to learn more about this technology, not for, some, personal financial gain, but more so in, I hate to say it, but in a more worldly view to where we can use this technology to really improve the human condition.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yes. And what was that CISO? What does that stand for?
Yes. So a CISO is a chief information security officer, and they're usually the ones that would be in charge of network information, data, and security within an organization. And they're primarily the ones that are in charge of, say, the security of an operation or organization.
Could you give us some examples, Bryan, of the type of problems that you think that Bitcoin SV can solve for enterprise? What are the pain points, the main ones?
I think in today's legacy, I think the big one is one that I just highlighted, and is cybersecurity. Throughout my career, of 20 years, it's always been the number one problem that CISOs or C-level execs would, share with me, is that it's their number one concern, and it's their number one thing that they, spent money on every single year. And, looking at that, experience that I had, and my understanding of, utilizing blockchain as a security system now has obviously grown. And there's some real incredible synergies with, say, the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is actually, a recommendation for all organizations that kind of incorporate these type of frameworks to provide security for their data and their information. And as you align, say, the NIST cybersecurity framework, align programmable contracts that are available that you could build on BSV, as well as the application protocol layers that sit on top of BSV, you can really start to see a synergy of an alignment of this framework and what the benefits and capabilities of blockchain actually produce. So, for example, if you're talking asset management, well, we know that blockchain does really good with that. Or if we're talking about messaging or alerting, well, you could take a primary function of a listening node that is just simply looking for Wright changes, that's changes that somebody has made to a document, and just reporting that. And where that would come into play would be, when we talk about one of the greatest greatest hacks ever, right? That you cannot put a financial price on, and I'm speaking more so of the SolarWinds hack. That was a 1.5-year process to where, well over 18,000 of their direct customers were, affected. And then all of their customers and vendors that are participating on their private networks may have potentially been, breached as well. Well, when you look at that problem from a security standpoint, it's because it's the infrastructure that's in place now, utilizing third parties and the privacy issues that we have with today's internet, that can be solved. And if you had something as simple as that listening node that was looking for the first thing that a hacker does, which is access your network and change the network access log, well, cybersecurity is no longer about prevention. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. And every CISO and enterprise pretty much understands that at this point, because there's no way for anybody to really control what somebody clicks on a computer. And when you get all of this, spam or malware, primarily it's because you got a free membership at a gym, right? And hey, they just gave me a free membership. Who doesn't want it? They click on it, and now, potentially your company's network has been breached. Well, something like that could have not prevented, but could have notified or alerted, SolarWinds of the actual breach on their network. And that's something that was very simple, that's very much in alignment, that would have prevented almost 1.5 years worth of, these hackers being able to manipulate everything, including the Microsoft source code, right? Because they had God mode, basically, functionality. And then there's other aspects of the NIST cybersecurity framework, as far as, the recovery concept, because you can store data, or you can verify that the data that's stored in a cloud that's, maybe off-site, because my recommendation for any type of security information was always have 3 copies, 2 different places, and 1 off-site. That, now you can verify that data hasn't been changed or manipulated as well. Because what happens, especially in cybersecurity, is a company will have an initial breach, and then they'll clean up that breach. But what happens is there's a time bomb that's sitting on some old implementation, right? Somewhere, stored somewhere, whether it's within, actual hardware stored or whether it's on, some piece of data somewhere in your network, that at a certain time in a certain place, it's going to all be repopulated. So you've spent all this money, time, and energy cleaning up your network, and then 6 months later, it pops back up. And so there's a persistent problem of actually trying to not just prevent it, but, be able to mitigate those damages early on. And like I said, the earlier notification that you can get, the better. So blockchain and just that simple way of a network access log could have prevented, possibly trillions of dollars of damage that happened across not just the enterprise world, but across the government world as well.
That's incredible. That's not an implementation that I've really heard of before. But it's a really great idea, isn't it? This listening node and just another monitoring service that the 24/7 blockchain takes in its stride, no problem. Yeah.
One thing
monitoring uptime, it does a similar sort of activity, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I'd add to that is the fact that, it's not just the listening node aspect, or it's not just the recovery or asset management aspect, but it's the actual infrastructure aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some of these things can be implemented on, say, a per company level to add these type of benefits and features that blockchain already provides, but they can also, as they're promulgated across many enterprises and many networks, now you start to see the infrastructure change. And what I mean by that is, our current situation with the internet is one where, it's very temperamental. You're relying on third parties to store information, which creates a honeypot, which creates, a cybersecurity risk. And whereas, something utilizing Bitcoin as a security system doesn't just change the
incentive.
Yeah, the incentive for just the enterprise. But think about it this way. If that same malware or that same hack for SolarWinds happened, right? So what happened is basically somebody came in, they changed the coding and in the update that was pushed out to the customers. Well, imagine this scenario, because you can actually put that information into a transaction and then utilize SPV or the hashing technique to verify the information that's within that transaction before you download it onto your own network. But even beyond that, right? Because once you put something out there in the ether, it's out there, right? If you put an update out there, there may be some place that doesn't get the second update to push it out if that's the way it's set up. But if, say, a node was defined, hey, well, there's malware in this transaction that's, causing problems or allowing people to be breached. Well, the best part about this small world network of distributive transaction processors, they're highly incentivized to have communication back and forth with each other. So they can easily just prune that node or work against that attacking node to, limit the downward effect of all of this damage that happens. And it's very much like the old serial Christmas lights of yore, right? When one light went out, you had all this downward impact of every light went out, and you had to figure out which light it was, and it took time and energy. And then finally, when you got the right one, everything came back on. Well, what's nice about using Bitcoin as a security system, as a metanet instead of the internet, is the sense that you have a much more robust and resilient set of connections. So when one transaction processor, say they go down, well, you still have that connection because you have parallel connections rather than a serial connection.
Right. So resilient and redundant.
What is a serial connection versus parallel? I think parallel, they're side by side.
Yeah, so a serial connection, one moment here. So a serial connection would just be, one connection per, so take the Christmas lights. So it'd be one connection per light, right? And a parallel would have, say, 2 or 3 wires per each light. And if one of those wires went bad, then the other wires are still there. And when you think about this small world network, it's very similar to that, right? Because you have all these competing but, economically incentivized cooperation of transaction processors that are working to maintain the health of the network, right? And they're all incentivized to make sure that there's not malware or attacking nodes or whatever they can do to mitigate that damage.
Sounds
That's
fabulous.
beautiful.
Yeah. Well, go on,
sorry.
Micah. No, Micah.
Are there also systems where normal users could profit from a service of the BSV ecosystem that their cybersecurity is more safe?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Secure?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Micah. There actually is a couple different opportunities out there now. So BitPing is one service that's built on BSV that helps provide network intelligence and prevent DDoS attacks. And it's actually a much more robust service than what you could purchase in the enterprise legacy environment that I once worked in, right? Because a lot of those services are based out of a data center. And where this is, kind of peer-to-peer type of network intelligence, because I can, hone down into, say, Tamworth, New Hampshire, is this website up and available to me? Well, yes, it is, right? But maybe in Cologne, Germany, it isn't available. But if I had some enterprise legacy service that is telling me this, they may only be checking it from a server in St. Louis. So I think that there's, not only does it provide more value to customers of BitPing, but it also provides a means to an end to any type of user that could actually utilize some minor resources that are available on their computer or network today and actually receive micropayments for checking the uptime of these type of websites. And additionally, there's another project that's more residential that really kind of works with cable modems that you have in your home, right? So basically you're able to it's called Router SV. And what it does is it's very much like the network access log that I described for the enterprise world. However, what it does is that it records, all the IPs, and it shares network intelligence of, say, blacklisted IPs. And you can actually, I believe that they're working on the functionality of monetizing those lists, or at least sharing those, blacklist IP lists to prevent people's home networks from being spammed. So that, there are ways that you can protect your network just using BSV today. Oops.
Wow. And you're bringing up all of these exciting ideas that sounds to me like there's wins over here, there's wins over there, and also greater efficiencies. So isn't that what lends itself to the greater impact of BSV or Bitcoin compared to the different legacy systems? It's the greater efficiency that has a more positive impact on the actual earthly environment.
Yeah, and you bridge a couple different discussions there, from biz dev to, say, environmental conservancy. So, between the two of them, yes, I mean, efficiency is definitely the primary goal. One of the primary goals of any enterprise that I work with is to become much more efficient with the resources and tools that they have. However, they're also looking to reduce costs, right? And that's another thing that, the BSV blockchain in particular provides, is this cost-saving efficiencies, that allow them to do more with less, and, put them in an innovative space to where they can actually save more money in the future. And I'll give you, again, a primary example is the cybersecurity concept, where you might be paying, for a significant, annual bill for, uptime, availability, and DDoS protection, right? And you're not getting the value out of the overall intelligence that you're hoping to understand and make sure that your website is available to everybody, anywhere, anytime in the world, versus, utilizing something like BitPing, which, obviously can provide much better intelligence and, is a lot more cost effective. And, ultimately that data can be, depending on if they develop their own solutions that are BSV, based, they could, create other type of efficiencies based on the information, or monetize some of the data that they are receiving now, or they're able to receive, like, an enterprise whitelisted or blacklisted IP set. Because if I know this set of range of IP from, say, Russia is attacking my enterprise, I'm sure every other enterprise is going to want that list of IPs to block them, to prevent that from the first place, right? So I think that there's a lot of different ways that they could monetize some of the data that they already have and do a lot more business to business type of value, as well as protect the consumer and protect their investors, because ultimately they have people that they have to respond to, right? If it's a public company, they have people that have invested in there that want to see them do better, grow bigger, and reduce costs.
No, fabulous. Putting all these tools together is the key, I think, isn't it, to the sort of indispensable BSV app. If somebody can kind of connect all these and sell them as a product to enterprise, they'll be onto a huge win. I mean, the plumbing of the internet isn't very exciting, let's be honest, but it's absolutely crucial. And, like in my own house, the second that the internet goes down, it's like yelling from every room of the house, So there's nothing more crucial than uptime and ability to access the data that you need when you need it. So it sounds like that's going to be a big part of BSV's role going forward then, is the plumbing of the internet.
Absolutely. I mean, when you really look at data, because that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about a network, whatever the network is, and the data and information that pass along it. Besides the current internet not really having a financial tool that's, native to the internet, which requires us to have these third parties and all these other, trust issues, right? You don't necessarily have that problem anymore, where you can take BSV and actually begin to integrate it and create beyond those efficiencies. And to go back to kind of what Rory mentioned, think about it this way. If you have a legacy environment now as an enterprise, and you're you have an application or data that you're maintaining, well, imagine using something like, Section 8 of the white paper, where it says simplified payment verification, but you're utilizing that actual service to reduce your infrastructure costs of legacy hardware, because you can now scale right along with distributed small world network.
Could
exactly.
you explain to us, Bryan, because not all of our listeners will understand what SPV is. Can you just explain why that takes a load away from the company that uses it?
Sure.
Why it reduces the load on their servers?
Yeah, so if you take a look at, besides the math function of that part, if you take a look at, the functionality, it really makes a lot of sense. So when you look at some of the other blockchains that are available, I mean, I remember a Raven coin wallet that I had, and every time I wanted to look at, whatever in there and it updated, it would have to basically get an entire copy of the blockchain. So I'm waiting 20 minutes, because I might open it once every whatever back in the day. But, so it would take this entire lengthy time for, this wallet to sync up with the blockchain to let you know where you're at, right? So
unacceptable.
If you're building an application, you need three things. You need the confidentiality of the information, you need the availability of the information, and you need the integrity of the information, right? The CIA of really information security. And BSV checks off all those boxes. So, SPV allows somebody to actually, again, kind of to scale along with the Bitcoin network without having this requirement of legacy equipment to have an entire copy of the blockchain. Now I can utilize, the Merkle root structure of the block, right? And understand, and verify that data has been put into a block. And I can confirm that without having to have an entire copy of the blockchain, whereas I might just be more worried about my specific transactions and not everybody else's.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily need, this huge infrastructure to utilize that.
For
Yes.
everyone, Rory is showing the Bitcoin white paper, and I think SPV is showed or explained or described on page 8 or so.
Yep.
Is it page 8?
Section 8.
That's right.
Yep.
Exactly. Section 8. And you can see the Merkle tree.
But I think it's
Now,
also
when we
page 8.
hear about the trust but verify, that debate, they are not taking into account Section 8 of the Bitcoin white paper. Is that correct?
You're absolutely correct, right? And here's the other part. They're not taking in the consideration of how blockchain or Bitcoin specifically works and the incentivization of it, right? And, I get a lot of comments about 51% attacks and, some of these other concepts. And it's interesting, right? Yeah, in theory, but yeah, a lot of the arguments and education that's available today is just outright outdated or wrong or misconstrued to make it a point. And that kind of highlights the energy consumption concept of blockchain discussion, whereas there's not been a real efficient model that really takes in throughput consideration, because most people early on just assumed that proof of work blockchains were not scalable. I mean, I can pull up probably 5 or 10 different reports that say if proof of work was scalable, it'd be this, but they don't even take that under consideration. So I think the discussion, and I highlighted this a little bit at CoinGeek, is that there really needs to be an honest discussion. And the only way to have one is to have honest information, right? And that information, I think, ultimately should reside on chain. I think just like we have weather data through WeatherSV on chain, you can actually put some of this miner data on chain and then build the proof of work on top of it. So you have, at least some verifiable data that everybody can kind of agree to.
I mean, also besides the scalability, it's the transaction costs, which there's a misconception out there concerning Bitcoin, because everybody is messing it up with BTC. It has nothing to do with the real Bitcoin BSV.
You're absolutely right. And, it's concepts like, say, dynamic addressing, right? Something that simple, that, is, for a lot of the people I speak with in the BSV ecosystem understand that, their wallet address changes every time they send something. Well, you go back 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and the people that had been primarily in the ecosystem, they're not used to that, right? That's not what they learned. They learned that you have this one alphanumeric address, and if somebody knows that address, guess what? They can see everything. If you're getting paid in Bitcoin, they're going to see that. If you're getting whatever, and they can use that intelligence to, perform crime if they wanted to on you, right? So I think you're absolutely right. I think that there's a huge gap in the education, especially on the technical aspect. And this goes from, obviously the people that are new versus the people that are been in exposed to blockchain for quite some time. And I think it's the later of the group that is going to be the slower ones to kind of migrate back towards this concept of what a real public blockchain is and what it really should be offering. And, once we get to that, crux of the conversation, I think you'll start seeing, the multitude of people that were never in this space jump ahead of those that are sort of stuck in this either group or tribal thinking rather than, I like to call it token thinking, because it's really what they're looking at is a token, right? And the token does what? Nothing. The token allows you to have access to this amazing technology. Well, what does the technology do? Well, that's what the conversation that I like to have is let's kick the tires, because when I go out to buy a car, I'm not buying it just based on the brand name. I'm buying it on how many miles per gallon do I get? Does it have a vanity, mirror? Does it, any of these other things that are important to me? So not that I need a vanity mirror, but so I look at it as, when you really take a deep dive and start kicking the tires of it, you really start to understand what it's capable of, rather than just a token that may have a price that somebody has associated to it, versus what can I get, what value can this token provide me utilizing this blockchain technology, and what is the, what does that, landscape look like there, to where is the pipe work developed, the infrastructure, the interoperability available for me to actually do the things that I may want to be able to do? And I would say the majority of, use cases have not been thought of, right? Because most people still have not even gotten to Section 8 of the white paper. So how can you assume that all the use cases are, used up, when there's so much more functionality that Bitcoin provides that has been relatively untouched and, not really thought of? And until there's, people really kind of utilizing the technology and thinking about it and kicking it more so, and it happens every day. We're seeing that with the transaction volume. And I see it with the developers that I work with on a daily basis, that there's a lot more people coming into the system, and a lot more people developing and building applications because of the, tools and stuff that are available now to kind of, make this a lot faster in creating these applications. Somebody like VXPass, I worked with them briefly, and they told me the idea, and then in a few weeks, not even, they basically had a product, right? I mean, with a few lines of code, you can create a $1 billion industry. And you just have to have the imagination, curiosity, and drive to do it at this point.
Can I just enter in on that? Our government in the UK spent multi-billion pounds on a track and trace app that barely works. I mean, seriously, billions and billions of pounds. And when you think about how easy and how fast it was to develop VXPass on BSV, it highlights the waste that's going on currently in both government and enterprise technology. They're making a real meal of things that should be pretty simple, actually.
Yeah.
And the ability to bootstrap a company from nothing yourself and get to profitability within probably a month or two, it really is there, isn't it?
It is. And, the whole concept of a new efficient enterprise is absolutely real, right? Especially with, the dawn of programmable contracts and tokenization. There's so many different things that could be utilized within just the company infrastructure, whether it's governance that allows less waste from, say, hey, I can be anywhere in the world and authenticate my identification or my vote, right, by using blockchain technology, versus, having to take my private jet to New York City for a company meeting, right, for a board meeting that takes all but 2 seconds. And then there's other efficiencies as well, like I highlighted, utilizing, simplified payment verification, or utilizing, some of these aspects that I've already kind of built into the blockchain as far as capabilities. You create these new efficiencies and you create these new revenue models as well. So there's so many different, straws to grasp at that, it really is going to take people to provide, people that understand the technology in depth, right, to really provide, the setting for somebody else to imagine a solution that is going to fit their problem. Because that, at the end of the day, nobody just implements technology to implement it. You might have a few innovators, right, that really just want the newest, coolest thing. But for the most part, every technology sale I've ever had in my career was to solve a problem, right? And
That's
whether
right.
the problem was, they were inefficient, or it was too costly, or it didn't, the problem or the solution they had before wasn't solving it. So,
and maybe the best thing it solves is the microtransactions, right? Because that was just not possible and before today, really, for companies to be able to charge tiny amounts or pay tiny amounts, and have transactions flow like a river.
yeah, absolutely. It's especially like when you look at the, it's a reinnovation of the printing press, right? At least the printing industry, because now instead of me wanting to see this article about whatever it is, and I go to their website and they want to charge me $32 for the month, I can just pay them $1. I mean, how much money do they lose by not charging, 10 cents or $1 versus charging me $32?
I would say 90% of their revenue, I would imagine, is what they lose. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that it really does change the dynamics so greatly that I think I think the newer generations are really going to have a means to change the world with this technology. It'd be great if it was my generation, but I don't see that happening. And, I think it's the younger generation that are really going to realize the true potential without having this spoiled concept of what blockchain is or isn't, and they'll be able to actually think about, this age of Aquarius, how do we apply, this new technology to create these efficiencies and communication and, improve the human condition.
One of the things that most aggravates me, sorry, I'll just quickly finish, is the misconception that Bitcoin is a huge user of energy and that it's inefficient. And that just couldn't be further from the truth, could it, Bryan? Can you explain to us why that's not the case?
Yeah, the models that everybody has utilized up to this point never took in throughput, transaction throughput, and it really functionality as well. I mean, there's a few different things that kind of play into that discussion, but if we just focused on transaction throughput alone, and you compare, say, a 1 meg BTC transaction versus a 500 meg BSV transaction or unbounded transaction, the sheer amount of transactions that you're able to get in each block, it uses the same amount of energy to create that block, whether there's 100 in there or 100 million. And so when you start to really look, at adding a variable for throughput, now you can have a discussion about, okay, what is the actual energy consumption per block, per transaction, and how does that compare to legacy environments? So if I took it, because ultimately comparing one blockchain to another doesn't really give you a value add as far as a digital transformation technology, from a legacy to something different. But if you start to compare it to those legacy models, well, I could almost show you today to where, the average Visa transaction is $82, right? And I could show you the amount of energy that's consumed and resources that are consumed for that $82 transaction versus an $82 transaction on Bitcoin SV, right? So the energy consumed there is far less. And the overall implication of what it took, the work to do that, is far less, and it happened much faster, right? And there's actually value towards the data that's stored in perpetuity. So you really do, you really do have an entirely different model to judge all of these blockchains on. And then when you really start to take into considerations of something like, say, proof of stake versus proof of work, and why the consensus models are important, you start to go towards this discussion of security and resiliency. And that's what's really important, because do I want to have, say, a public blockchain that's available to anybody that is secure and resilient, and that everybody with one CPU has one vote? Or do I want to utilize a consensus mechanism to where the people that were there early on and have the majority majority of tokens are the ones that can de facto control the entire network, right? How much more secure is that and robust is that? So I think that there's a lot of, there's a lot of variables in this discussion, which I think gearing up towards the next CoinGeek, October 5th through October 7th in New York, there'll be a lot more open discussion with real insight and data that will be available for not just anybody to kind of understand this argument better, but actually start to compare these enterprise blockchain implementations and these variables that actually take in consideration simplified payment verification, where you don't need legacy hardware, so you can remove that instance, where it improves the cybersecurity aspect and privacy of your data, so you can remove legacy hardware, software, maybe even some of the resources that manage that off the plate. And now when you start really looking at what that means, now you start to see, well, wait a minute, if I don't have 20 people that oversee this entire data center because we've moved it to a distributed network that is available 24/7, that has built-in resiliency, I don't have to worry about Builder Bob going out back and digging up my fiber line, and now all my customers aren't able to access their data or information or services. You start to really see the impact that Bitcoin has in this legacy model, to where it really makes it much more efficient and allows people to have much more availability to information that's way more secure, and that can actually be validated and protect them, whether it's a program, whether it's a financial transaction, whether it's a piece of data, whether they're selling it, or whether they're just putting it out there for public consumption.
Wonderful.
It's about time.
Yeah, it definitely is. I can't wait to kind of see
about
that discussion.
You had mentioned the age of Aquarius, so I wanted to put out the anecdote of the lotus flower.
Okay.
So the lotus flower, it grows through a lot of mud, and then it blooms, and it's there in the pond full of water. So even though maybe there has been a lot of resistance to this great innovation, still we have wonderful people all here. We're learning together. You're building, Casey's building, Micah's building, Ruth's building. I'm taking notes, learning a lot, waiting for my time to build something too. And along those lines, I had worked with a lot of different enterprises in the past on things such as the servers. So enterprise data had been on servers, and then the servers were then moving into the hybrid situation, where they were partly on the cloud in the database and then partly on-premise opportunities for corporations. And there were some companies that said, hey, we'll run everything on Post-it notes. We don't need any of that data stuff. We do just fine. And then there were others that said, yes, we have a hybrid solution. We use Windows Server version, blah, blah, blah. And then now we have the scaled protocol of Bitcoin. We saw shatters at the conference showing us 100,000 transactions per second backstage, 50,000 transactions per second front stage. And that is approximately 25,000 more transactions per second than Visa. At this point. This is a month ago or 2 months ago. So to all my friends that I used to work with, how ready is BSV? Can we onboard enterprises right now today?
Yes. We are seeing, large entities that want to build on BSV. It's capable to, handle, like you said, a lot of transactions and a lot of throughput. Where I think, ultimately what happens is people have to become familiar, right? Educated about the technology, because there are some differences from what people understand, and there's some serious differences in the information that's available. if you just, looked up something to try to compare, say, the BTC protocol with the BSV protocol, you're not going to find anything, right? Well, you'll find this M&P report, eventually when it's published, but right now there's not much that's been available for anybody, to kind of consume that information.
And we need journalists to step in, don't we? Decent journalists to pick up this and run with it and represent the true situation. But nobody seems to be doing that at the minute. Do you think it's because it's too difficult, or the vested interests are that BTC gets all the press?
I think there's a few different things. I don't think there's just like one answer that kind of sums it all up. But I think it's a misunderstanding. There's very few, journalists that really can understand the technology as it is, right? Mm-hmm. Like I've worked a little bit with Eileen Brown from ZDNet. Like, mm-hmm. She understands blockchain very well, right? And she can explain the subtleties of blockchain very well as well. But there's other groups that I've sat in on where there's, journalists that are, being demoed or shown or told something, and they're just not familiar enough to ask the right questions or know what questions to ask. Mm-hmm. And so that's one aspect. And I think the other aspect is that, there's just a huge education gap in what's available, and there's no way for people to go back and authenticate this information. And there's such a mix of information that's available that there's no say firm resource outside of, obviously things that I feel like the BA works on, provides really good value and a lot of the stuff that's happening within the ecosystem. But when you get beyond our ecosystem, there's not a lot of people that are even looking at blockchain, and that includes major technology companies, right?
Perhaps we need a boot camp for journalists.
Well, yeah, that might be a good idea.
Let's be real. I mean, they control the advertising market just as much as they control the mainstream media. And we can see with like the Laser Eye crew and things like that, a organized effort at propaganda to confuse people and keep them away by highlighting the negativity and some of the dark things that it's, the dark web and that kind of stuff, instead of positive things and the changes that this technology is being able to bring to the world. So it's clear, when you start looking at why this is, being suppressed, even in how much they're shorting it, that they're trying to control the narrative of, people getting out there. That's one of the hesitations I've had on publishing my own content outside of doing it in this safe container with you guys is, the people that start getting out here first, I've experienced on Clubhouse. We take the most arrows. Mm-hmm. And, that's something that we're all experiencing now. When you try to speak, there's a lot of people that can be pretty vicious to defend their beliefs and their investments. That, people have made a lot of money on this criminal, information war that we're in. So I'm just extremely grateful for you guys at BA and also CoinGeek for exposing the crypto crime cartel that is connected to the advertising of this whole space. I mean, look at all them big time, huge influencers that they have, under their narrative that are pushing these agendas that can, in my opinion, enable a liquidity grab from humanity globally. And it's really scary.
But I don't think we want to copy anything that they're doing, though. I think we need to keep on our own path and just keep coming up with the goods, keep coming up with the improvements and new businesses and the enterprise technologies like Bryan is looking into, and walk our own road, So I think we totally ignore it. Personally.
Even on Clubhouse, I've connected with 9-figure earners that, one person in mind, he's a multimillionaire, huge marketing person, and he's building this huge thing on the Ethereum blockchain. I got on a Zoom call with him and was explaining how the technology had been taken over and that it's been restored, and look at all the, growth in this ecosystem for 2 years of stable development. And he stopped me mid-sentence and told me he was involved in an Ethereum project and he didn't want to talk to me anymore. It was very rude, and I was doing absolutely nothing but trying to bring value to his life. I wasn't asking or trying to sell him anything. I was just sharing this. He reached out to me after he heard me speak in a clubhouse room and asked for more information. So I just authentically told him my vantage point of the space, and I think he was just fishing for information to see what I was talking about, honestly. But his Ethereum project
And discouragement,
Mhm.
So
I think things need time to change. Things, all people. It takes time to enthrone your own thoughts or your own perspectives in life, to get over the ego and create or integrate some new ideas and thoughts. So I'm so happy.
Paradigm
Also,
shift, isn't it?
So Bryan is doing a great job at the BA. Also sharing, educating people when people or companies are reaching out to the BA and want to know about the systems. Bryan, what would be, are there any wishes, or how do you see things will develop, or how do you see the ecosystem is growing?
I see it growing. I mean, I feel it growing on my own bandwidth time, right? Like it's something that's a struggle on a daily basis at this point. So
To keep up with,
to keep up with a lot of what's going on, and especially just in the outreach aspect of getting developers, getting them the tools they need, finding more tools that can help expedite the development and the use of all this pipe work that's been developed already over the last couple of years. But I definitely, from my vantage point, I see a snowball effect of development happening in the background that most people that have been in the ecosystem have no clue that is actually being developed, right? So from my viewpoint on Twitter, which I'm not on there very much as I used to be, just because I've wanted to remove myself from that perspective. And it's one thing I've noticed since doing it is, Casey's point is very poignant. It's absolutely true. If you go on Twitter, you're going to have those type of conversations. If you go on other venues, they happen there as well, right? And you also have, the push against that type of, that type of discussion. But, the way I look at it as those people, they've already bought in. Like you said, they've invested, they've either gotten very lucky or whatever, so that's very difficult to kind of dissuade somebody who's made any amount of money on something that they're wrong, right? Like, how could I be wrong? I just bought this out here, right? So I think sometimes, the energy that you expend on somebody that can already give you that wall before you even start talking is probably not worth your time. But those people that are able to have a conversation and communicate, that's worth the information that you possess. Like, I consider all of us on this call right here extremely lucky to have the knowledge and understanding that we have today. And I say that like as an understatement of the year from my discussions with people that are within the blockchain space, that are super technical, that actually they can't get past just one or two basic aspects.
Like we've got a crystal ball.
Yeah, you really do. And as I'm glad all of you are building on BSV. And Rory, you need to be building more than just one thing. So think of a few ideas. I know you got plenty of.
Man, she's the backbone of Women of BSV. So she is building this. This is going to be wonderful too. I mean, we're going to be able to help so many women. This isn't just a core little group of women talking to people in the space. We plan to do all kinds of outreach for the communities and women in need and all these different things. So Rory, you're amazing with your building. Don't say that. You know,
And you've
you're
got,
so building.
and honestly, yeah, and I can attest, and
Yes.
this is a great venue, but I can attest for Micah too. Like Micah's one of the most driven people I've ever come across in my entire life. And as far as the things that she's able to do, if we had 10 more Micahs out in the world, the
Yeah.
world would be a totally different place. So,
Exactly.
I
You know what?
I can't speak
So,
highly enough
One
of.
thing I just want to jump in, I really admire about Micah is you gave us feedback about our website, and it was so valuable, the
Yeah.
feedback that you gave us.
I made the
And you
changes.
did it in such a graceful way. And I really admire that. That's one way I would like to grow, is to be able to give feedback in a way that is so helpful to other people. So I really admire that, as well as your speech at CoinGeek. Woo! I'm an uber Micah fan.
Thank you. But I have to also like to add, you don't have to be a developer. You don't have to have any idea of IT systems, anything like that. But some kind of understanding about the technology, about their use cases, and be able to put it into simple words that everyone can understand it. And the experience, how to speak, how to communicate these things, it will come after a while with your own experiences that you make in the process. And it's a wonderful time to get into it. And I think Rory is one of the best examples. You will be in the position to speak to the biggest players in the world, to translate, to do the translation work, or to build the bridge from like an IT nerd to a normal person. And this is much,
And it needs to happen.
It's as valuable.
Greening the desert.
Who's creating the application.
Exactly. And that is my passion, and my goal is very simple, just person to person. So here we are, and we're talking, and then from this, maybe a family member listens. Maybe it opens their mind. Maybe a friend that we knew once, here or there, listens, and it opens their mind to the opportunity that is here. Bryan mentioned that a lot of the old industry, we can call them the OGs if they fancy, they are, off on a boat going off the side of the earth. And then the opportunity is here. We've got the treasure chest. And it sounds like the protocol is robust enough to accept enterprise data like ERP. Is that right, Bryan?
Yeah, I think that they have some work to do still with Terra Node, to really put that implementation out. And I think that's probably the only real hiccup that we have at this point, as far as, with a vast amount of data coming on chain. But I suspect from now to, the end of the year prior to CoinGeek, that we'll start to see a lot of these applications that have been being built in the background. We'll start to see that translate in transactions on chain. And we'll start to see that also translate into credibility of the BSV blockchain, right? And that will also bring more people to, expose them to, okay, wait a minute, what's this smoke and fire over here? I probably should pay attention to what's going on there, because something is happening. And, as we progress throughout the rest of the year here towards CoinGeek, I fully suspect that, this will become more and more evident to those OGs, as well as to the, more importantly, to this new generation of people that, I'll add on one attribute I think is very important. And I agree with everything Micah just said, as far as you don't necessarily need to be a blockchain expert. I mean, you can actually leverage your relationships that you have now. But one of the things that I think that will really make people successful is that you're curious, but more so that you have an imagination, right? That you have an experience with a problem that you've once encountered throughout your work experience, your daily life, whatever it is, and that you can perceive or imagine a solution based upon benefits or capabilities of blockchain. All right. And it could just be one capability, right? It could just be the asset management capability, or it could be the messaging capability. So, and once you've defined that and you really take a look at your own life experiences and really say, okay, what are some problems that I've come up with in my work life that blockchain could have solved in this specific industry? Well, I've already got some type of experience, obviously, in that field. So why don't I reach out to people that I'm familiar with already communicating this type of way with them, that already have, believe that I have some understanding of what their daily work lives or daily problems are, because they probably have the same problem that you had when you were working there. And now you can build that bridge to have that conversation with them on a one-on-one basis and really start to build a rapport of understanding. Because I didn't go to my enterprise meetings and just do an information dump on every technology available that can make you efficient, right? I would have never sold anything. Their eyes would have glazed over after 15 minutes and they would have told me, beat it, right? But if I go and I say, and I stop, I listen, and I say, hey, okay, if you had a magic wand, what in this place would you want to see happen, right? What is your problem? Take me through a normal day. What happens when this happened? What happens when this happened? Well, what is the cost of that? Okay, what could be done to improve this? And then now I can come back to them a day, 2 days, 2 weeks later and say, I've thought about your problem that you've described to me, and here is a solution that could solve that problem. Are you are you interested in exploring it? And you'll have much better luck at doing something like that than you will be, here's a laundry list of why BSV is the greatest thing since bread, right? I mean, people are not, communication doesn't happen that way, and business deals don't happen that way. And building a rapport with a stranger or somebody that you just have an acquaintanceship with, really takes time, effort, and confidence. And by training yourself to whether it's taking the Bitcoin Academy courses or some
Which
other
is great.
courses,
Yeah.
then you can educate yourself. And as long as you have that imagination and the curiosity, you can really make a huge future for yourself here. There's lots of opportunity.
Brilliant.
Well, and from a marketing standpoint, that is the best part of the opportunity, is being able to earn a long-term income that's completely passive just for your efforts in sharing all of this amazing content. Like, that's my favorite thing. I've been in digital marketing school for 5 years now, just kind of, my own self-pace on the side, learning everything that I can. And I never felt like I wanted to really build one of these huge campaigns and put it out there, because there's so much work on the back end of, emailing your list and replying to all the comments and all this stuff. It's just the absolute full-time job, just maintaining your campaign once you put it out there, until you can find out what works and get all that market feedback to put it into an evergreen form and automate it. But with this, it's just, not only are you empowering people with a tool they can use to peacefully resist a lot of the things that are being forced on us on the legacy internet, but they can also earn a long-term passive residual evergreen income that can be passed to their kids even. I mean, I've had my Facebook account for 15 years. You can think that if I had all that money from every single micropayment of every click I generated on Facebook over the last 15 years,
I know, it's insane.
I'd be retired right now. So that's the best opportunity, and it's you get rewarded in so many ways. You're teaching people how to buy the most valuable asset in the world, how to earn it, and be empowered in that way and empower others through earning it. It's just all around win-win, inviting people into this ecosystem. So if they have the ears to listen and actually hear you, most people take action and are delighted to learn about all the, like I said, options we can use to not consent to all the information wars and censorship and just shenanigans that are happening on the legacy internet. There's got to be some accountability to these corporation owners at some point too. So I'm hoping. And so I also like to say that I hope, when and if these platforms do fall very quickly, when there's a mass exodus from any kind of disclosure about all the, shadow operations that are occurring behind the scenes in these major platforms, that the things that are being built in this ecosystem will keep us from having to go back into some form of digital dark ages where we can't create those revenue streams for ourselves. So really taking your content now before any of those, floors fall out or rugs get pulled on these long-term platforms, and securing it on the, blockchain ecosystem platforms and inviting your entire network you've spent years to build with you can, help to secure those revenue streams if these platforms that we use to generate our main forms of income go down. It is a possibility. So, trying to stay ahead of that could be very, advantageous financially, especially because you're earning Bitcoin versus fiat currency on these platforms. So that's just an important thing to highlight in the differences of, opportunity here from a marketing standpoint.
Yeah, micropayments make sense on both definitions of that term, right?
I see Diddy's back. Are you being our timekeeper, Diddy? Should we be wrapping up?
Yes, I mean we are 1 hour 20 into Bryan's discussion, which is actually like I've been listening on the sidelines, and this is fascinating for me. And I'd like to ask Bryan if he would like to come back at some point in the future as well, because this discussion is really interesting and it's really educational. And that's one of the things that I kind of want to do is help with, getting this information to people, which, trying to educate a wider audience and stuff as well. But I do think from this particular discussion, then it does raise more and more questions and more things that, people would like to know about specifically. And one of those is, how do people get in touch with you, Bryan? I mean, do they get in touch with you via the Bitcoin Association, especially if they're interested in the cybersecurity side of things, which you specialize in?
Yeah, so I'm usually available, definitely by email is probably the best way to get a hold of me. And it's real simple. It's my first name, Bryan, Bryan, at bitcoinassociation.net. Shoot me an email. We'll set up a time to, definitely connect. And, whether it's going over pitch decks or resources, or depending on, because I speak with everybody from investors to entrepreneurs to developers to, internal companies at the, within the ecosystem to, a lot of enterprise outreach as well. So, if you fall within any of those categories or any other category and you're just interested, definitely shoot me over an email and, we'll set something up from there. If you reach out to me on Twitter or any of the other social sites, I do my best to try to, follow up on there. But, it's always a lot easier to, hit me up right directly into my email box.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. So your email address is scooting across the bottom of the screen for people if they need it. So thank you very much. And I really appreciate your time as well, Bryan. It's been really educational. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're more than welcome. And just so you know, there should be soon here, an ebook on Bitcoin as a security system being released. I'm not sure of the actual date, within the next week or two, but that'll be actually pushed out via LinkedIn as well. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, there's a good chance you'll come across that post or receive a message from me, inviting you to access this free Bitcoin as a security system ebook. and it really does a great job of really conceptualizing it on a independent and more overarching infrastructure level.
Fantastic. So you can come back as well and talk about your book that you've published as well when that's been released properly.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, absolutely.
And we can put that in the link of the description for this video as well. So if anybody is interested, then that's fantastic. Well done, and congratulations on your release of your publication as well.
Thank you so much, Diddy. I appreciate that.
Well, Bryan, as Diddy said, we look forward to speaking with you again soon. You have a wealth of knowledge, and thank you so much for coming to speak with us today.
You're welcome. I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bryan. It was awesome.
Yes, fun times. Look forward to talking with you again. Take care.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.